The great thing about design is that it's all of us. It's a language we're all in together.
Hi everyone, I'm Amy Devers and this is Clever. Today I'm talking to home design entrepreneur and best-selling author Christiane Lemieux. Christiane has founded several successful brands in the home design space, including DwellStudio, which she founded in 1999 and sold to Wayfair in 2013. The Inside, a direct-to-consumer, technology-driven home furnishings brand. Cloth & Company, a wholesale brand that deals in made-on-demand textiles. And Lemieux AC, her luxury home furnishings brand. And as a design historian and business expert, Christiane has also contributed her wisdom and talent to books and magazines. Her first book, Undecorate, was met with critical acclaim in 2011, and she's just recently released, in 2020, her first business book, Frictionless, Why the Future of Everything Will Be Fast, Fluid, and Made Just for You. And if this wasn't enough, she's also an investor in the consumer and tech sectors with a focus on female founders, inclusivity, and diversity. What a powerhouse. Here's Christiane.
My name is Christiane Lemieux. I live in New York City, and I am a design entrepreneur, author, designer, technology person. And I do it because I really believe in the creative process. And I think that it's something that we can continually build on, not only as humanity, but also in our industry. So I just like to push everything forward on a constant basis.
I can't wait to get into how you do that. But before we get there, can we go back to the beginning? I really like to start building from the ground up. So would you take me back to your childhood and describe your formative years for me? Like your hometown, your family dynamic, and what kinds of activities captured your fascination?
Sure. Where I am today, or where we all are today, has everything to do with our formative years, obviously. So I am Canadian. I grew up in Ottawa, Canada. My mother is an academic, and my father is a federal judge. But my parents met at the Sorbonne in Paris in 1969 on a midnight train to Moscow.
That's so romantic.
I know. They were on a school trip. We, as a family, have spent a lot of our years dividing our time between Canada and Paris. You know, my father's French, my mother's English, Canadian. And so that's really sort of the backdrop. And they spend and have spent a lot of time traveling. So I think my first international trip was when I was 2 years old, and we never stopped after that. So my greatest memories of growing up were, you know, Christmases on a boat going down the Nile in Egypt and India. I mean, they literally took me all over the world. And I think it was the greatest gift because I saw so much. I just uncovered a duffel bag of slides that my mom took.
Man,
yeah,
that's
I know that
gold. That's treasure.
I know it's treasure. She wants me to convert them into digital imagery, which I'm going to, dig up somebody to do. But I think the basis for me for curiosity, for an appreciation of aesthetics, for my deep, deep passion with design and art history. That's where it all comes from. It comes from traveling the world my entire life. You know, my parents never had a second home or anything like that. The world ended up being our second home, and what a gift. I cannot thank them enough, and I'm trying to do the same thing with my children now.
It sounds like you kind of had keys to the world from a really young age via travel and your parents, but I'm guessing if your mom was an academic, then she also probably imparted some of this voracious curiosity. What kind of academic was she?
So my mother studied Russian literature and language. And so she studied it at the Sorbonne and then later at Middlebury and then at MGU in Moscow. She's a sort of a linguist, is deeply fascinated by Russian literature. So slightly different than art history and design history, but I think academia nonetheless. We also have a side family theory that she may or may not be a spy or may not have been a spy. We don't know because we can't get that confirmed, but we were in some odd places at odd times. So who knows?
Oh my God, what mystery and intrigue. How exciting.
That happened over Christmas this year. So we were like, that really checks. So I don't know. The question, it's just out there.
Huh.
Yep.
That's a mystery worth digging into.
Seriously. Or a great screenplay at some point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So growing up, it sounds like it was very textural. You had the inputs from all over the world of not just, land formations, but other cultural heritage and craft and color palettes and textures and smells. And what a sensorially rich background to develop your creativity from.
I mean, correct. Yeah. So I think that when my parents dragged me through the Louvre on a Sunday morning and I complained, now I look back and just thank them.
Yeah, no, I have the same thing. I remember it was the Louvre where my dad coined the term museum burnout because we were just young and we had seen so much I couldn't process it anymore. And I was like, get me some ice cream.
It's so true. Like even as an adult, like you can only you do one museum in New York and the ability to take it all in, process it, understand what it means to you, how it's influencing you, how you can be inspired is a lot.
Okay, so were you traveling all the way up through to your college years and beyond? Like, was travel a constant background for you?
Like constant. It is my thing. I'm going to Nairobi on Friday. It's the battery I plug myself into. And I would say that the same thing is true of New York City. So obviously I came down here a lot as a child to, for the museum and the museum burnout with my parents. But I remember in high school, we came down to do an art class at the Met. We came down from Canada. And I stood on Worcester Street, not 100 feet from where I live now. And I was like, wow, this is home. And it's because there's something about the energy in New York. And it's one of these funny things. You are either all in or you're all out. New York is like binary, right? And so for me, through the ups and downs, I mean, I've lived through 9/11, just through the pandemic, the financial crisis in 2008. I mean, this has been my home for much more than half of my life. There's something about this place with respect to the energy, the inspiration, the culture, what you see and feel, smell, taste, all of those things every day that is such a big part of my creative process. I mean, New York really is the energy that powers me, I think.
It is a very concentrated hub of energy and so many rich pockets of flavor and inputs that are constantly flowing through it. That's why they call it the greatest city in the world.
It's a portal to something. You just feel it, and it's not subtle, obviously. And it's also not for everybody. The thing about New York is you have to be willing to take it on every day.
So back to your youth, what about the teenage years? Like, what flavor was pronounced for you? Were you industrious, rebellious, lost, super focused? How were you expressing yourself and your creativity then?
So I was very rebellious to the point where my parents sent me to boarding school.
Because, oh, damn. I want to hear this.
Yes. I will say the following, though, pretty willingly on my part. I mean, I got up to all kinds of trouble. I'm the person who snuck out of the house at night, and I was very rebellious. I was really independent from early on, and I'm seeing some of the exact same attributes in my children. I can't tell if it's DNA and nurture versus nature. I think about this a lot. I just didn't want to be told what to do. I wanted to find my own path very early on. And it turns out that my path and the way my parents wanted to raise me and the rules and structures that they wanted to put around were not congruous. So they sent me to boarding school, but I also went willingly. I lived in a smaller town in Canada called Ottawa. They sent me to a girls' boarding school in Toronto. It was like a step up. It was like moving from Washington to New York. And for me, it was eye-opening. I got to see and experience a much bigger city. For me, it was much more interesting. And I think that was very formative too, because it made the jump to New York very easy.
That sounds like the daughter of a spy.
We secretly call her Agent M now, like the whole family.
And maybe it was also the spy in her who's like, I can't have my daughter sneaking out at night. It's just not safe.
Right. Yeah. Or under my watch. Yeah. And wait a second. How's this happening to me? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was interesting because I went to an all-girls school, and looking back, I also, when you remove all of the social issues of a teenager, you can focus. I don't think it's for everybody, but for me, it ended up working very much to my benefit, because I went from the girl who snuck out to the girl who wanted to do really well in school. That was, I think, very helpful.
That is very helpful. Wow. Did you find yourself like in the trenches forming deep long-term bonds with other people who are in the same formative situation?
I did. And the other thing that was interesting about that experience was it was a pretty international group of humans from all over the place.
Oh, that's nice.
There were girls who came from Iran, and hearing their stories was so interesting. And girls from Africa, and girls from all over, some Europeans, and all over Canada. There was definitely a much more diverse and global outlook in boarding school than in my local public school.
Wow. You've had a nice aperture on the world. Okay, so at what point did the love and fascination with art and design strike you, and did that drive you to study at Queen's University and Parsons? Can you connect those dots for me?
Yeah, yes. I would be painting and sketching and drawing from the moment that I showed up. So I remember my parents sent me to Montessori when I was 3 years old, and there was an art station in the classroom, and I, instead of rotating, would try and just stay there, and do that and only that. And that was the first, when I look back, that was the first kind of experience for me where I think I fell into the flow, because I would totally lose track of time and space and everything. And that's continued through my life. So for me, it's the sort of the artistic process is the place that I'm the happiest and feel the most comfortable. So it was pretty evident to me early on the road I was going to take. And, I remember, when other people were asking for, candy, I was asking my dad for art supplies. It's been a fairly constant thing. My parents wouldn't let me go to design school right out of the gate. They're academics, so they wanted me to get an undergraduate degree. So I went to Queen's University and I studied art history. When I had proved myself worthy, they let me apply to design school, and I came to New York to go to Parsons.
And what did you study at Parsons?
I studied fashion design, of all things. Parsons is an incredible school. To be honest, my undergraduate degree was easy compared to the workload that they piled on at Parsons. It's one of these things that's like part university, part trade school. And they really teach you how much work you're going to have to do to be in any of these creative fields, which is a lot, and it's hands-on. It was a 12-hour day at Parsons from, sketching for fashion illustration all the way through to sewing and all these things. But what it taught me, I think, is A, respect for the creative process. B, it gave me the tools to understand how hard and what a sort of voluminous amount of work this was going to be. It also taught me the sort of design fundamentals. I think the interesting thing about the creative process is when you have yours, you can apply it to, whether it's food styling or fashion or interiors. The biggest sort of bridge for me was textile design, right? So in fashion, I really learned textile design, and that was the bridge between fashion and interiors for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's true. I've found the same thing. I studied furniture design, but I was maybe even in New York City when you were, because I went to FIT for a couple of years. When I learned the process of designing and building hands-on furniture, I was able to see the world in an exploded view. And I was like, well, now I can build anything, like whether that's an idea, a platform, a system. When you know how to work with yourself from zero to this, you can apply it to anything. It's just magic. Yeah.
Correct. Yep.
So learning all those lessons at Parsons and putting in all that work and connecting yourself to textile design, is that how you launched yourself into the professional world? And what were your first few steps like for you in the early years professionally? How'd you find your entrepreneurial footing, especially?
So I started DwellStudio a year after I graduated from Parsons.
That's it?
Yep.
Oh my God.
So
that's wild.
I've only had 2 real jobs in my life. One was the first job I took. So I had a friend at Parsons who married a gentleman who was in venture capital, who had bought a home furnishings company called Portico, which was in New York City. In my final year of school, she had me go and meet with him. And he said, look, I need somebody to be a creative director here. This is, it was a bed and bath store. So a lot of bedding, textiles and things like that. He's like, do you want to try? And I said, sure. So I left Parsons, went to be the design director at Portico, started designing and putting things on the floor, and they started to resonate with consumers. The interesting thing is that coming from Canada, wallpaper had started there. So I knew Tyler Brule and, that whole team, and was really deeply influenced by mid-century. It was really a thing in Canada before it became a big thing in the United States. That was sort of the language I was speaking. And so I, started designing textiles that were sort of more modern, mid-century focused, put them on the floor at Portico. They resonated, and I just decided I was going to do it myself. And I had, no idea how, and I just fumbled my way through it.
What do you attribute that to? Is that just courage and moxie, or was that naivete, or a mix of both?
Oh, I think it was a very serious mix of both. I think my parents told me I could do anything, so I believed them. And then
man. That's awesome.
And I also think that I didn't know all the things that I fundamentally know now, which is, how much money it takes to build a company, all of these things. I just figured my way through it. So I launched the company. I launched Dwell in 2000. I don't know, I was just graduating from school. At the same time, this is all serendipitous luck too. One of the people that I worked with at Portico for that short amount of time went on to Crate and Barrel. Her name is Celeste. She's amazing. She's still a friend of mine. She told the team at Crate and Barrel, oh, there's a designer at Portico who's gone on her own and she's doing some interesting things. Why don't you see if she'll do some work for you? And so what I did is, on one hand, I started a private label business, which I called Design Space. And on the other, I started Dwell. And I did a whole bunch of work for all of these larger companies, Crate and Barrel being the first one, but then I went on to do Walmart.com and Room and Board, a whole bunch of different home companies. And, even Bed Bath & Beyond, I started producing in Asia and shipping containers to the US. It scaled very quickly. And I used the funds from the private label design to actually build the brand Dwell. It was interesting. The world was very different then. I had traveled to Asia a lot, so I had some connections there. So I was able to do sourcing very easily. It kind of all got tied up in this interesting bow for me, because between the travel, the language, the ability to set this all up pretty seamlessly and inexpensively and actually do all the work myself, because I was so used to it at Parsons, working 18 hours a day, that I got this off the ground without any outside funding.
Man, that sounds like such a heavy lift, but I guess you did have some pathways already carved. Not that that makes it easy, but I'm also just wondering and hoping, did you have some mentors you could call up and ask for advice when things got overwhelming, or when you hit a place where you'd never been before? Or were you really just I think I'll try this, and if it works?
If I'm totally honest with you, I was like, all right, I'll just figure it out. Because I was really young, right? So I didn't have any mentors. I'd never really worked anywhere. And it's just like a puzzle for me. It's interesting, in retrospect, so much of entrepreneurship ends up being creative problem solving. That's all you're really doing on a constant basis.
Speaking of your serial entrepreneurship, you've launched many brands since DwellStudio, including Living by Christiane Lemieux, Cloth & Company, Lemieux SE, and the inside most recently. Can you walk me through your entrepreneurial progression and some of the major highlights and lessons that you've integrated along the way?
Yeah, so it turns out maybe in the end, I'm as much a serial entrepreneur as I am a designer.
I think yes.
I think I like to build things. If I'm intellectually honest, I'm much better at building things than running things. So I'm a builder and less an operator. So I built DwellStudio over 13 years, and then I sold it to Wayfair in 2014. It was really interesting for me because that was my second job. So my first job was at Portico. My second job was at Wayfair. When I went to Wayfair, I got to learn really the e-commerce fundamental from one of the best CEOs in the e-commerce business. I mean, Niraj is pretty phenomenal. And the way he thinks and approaches things is so wildly different from how I do that I think that there were a lot of really interesting learning moments for me. He is very rational, very focused, very engineering driven. He stack ranks everything. He's methodical in ways that I wasn't. I mean, some creatives are very methodical, very process oriented, very structured. I just am not. Right. And so I learned a lot from being there. And I also, I think, saw the landscape in a slightly different way than my colleagues did because I was coming at it from a creative point of view, right? Right into a very technology driven environment. And so that is where Cloth and Company, and then after that, The Inside came from. Because I realized that, there were all these cutting edge things happening in technology that applied to the industry that I'm in and that I love. And, were there ways we could bring more interesting, thoughtful solutions to our consumers, right? To our customers. And so what people really want to do in home furnishings is design. And by designing, taking your form and putting your own fabric to it and designing your room is a really great tool. And technology allows us to do that pretty seamlessly now. I worked with some of my favorite factories. We got digital printers. We got very quick throughput. This is prior to, obviously, the supply chain issues we're having right now, as well as component shortages and things like this. But theoretically, a customer could choose their design, have it printed on upholstery fabric, have it upholstered, and then turned around to them in under 4 weeks. Right. And pre-pandemic, this was a completely feasible business model. And the great thing about all of these, putting all these things together is that nobody's holding inventory. There aren't gigantic warehouses to heat and or air condition. We're not having to produce 3,000 yards of textiles using, 10,000 gallons of water. It's also much gentler for the planet. And that's, I think that's important too. And I think technology is allowing us to do that thoughtfully across a lot of manufacturing. So I just wanted to put together all of these ideas into, again, problem solving into a company and put it out there for consumers. And that's what we did at The Inside.
Yeah, it is so fascinating. I also think if you are a manufacturer and you have to commit to sort of anticipating how many of a certain piece are going to sell, then you also need to commit the marketing dollars to that. And then that's what you kind of put forward. And when you don't have to do that, you really do allow the consumer a lot more creativity with their options and their product choices because you're not really invested in what they buy. You're just invested in how they buy it and getting it to them in a way that's, as you say, frictionless.
I think that's right. And I also think that, especially in our industry, I think the fashion industry as well, these creative industries, I mean, we have so much more access to inspiration, imagery, beauty. We can really start to formulate our sort of aesthetic opinion. And I think that it's much more niche and segmented than people think. Then people can go after exactly what they want. And, they can modify things that are 90% there to be 100% there, to really make them happy with their purchases. And for us, when you're holding somebody's hand and helping them create their home, it's not only an honor, but also you want them to have exactly what they want. And I don't think that's, page 305 of a catalog anymore. I think it's personal. And I think that during the pandemic, we also all learned that our homes are sort of our everything. And they certainly are now. And it looks like they will be that for the foreseeable future, right? So I keep talking about the decade of home. I think we're going into the decade of home because I think people are thinking about their spaces and how they make them feel a lot more than they used to.
I 100% agree. And I teach furniture design here at Rhode Island School of Design, and I'm seeing something I've been aware of, but it's now really coming through in the generation of designers that I'm working with, is they're actively designing for a more itinerant, nomadic kind of lifestyle because they want to move from place to place, but they don't want to bring cheap, disposable, throwaway furniture into their spaces. They want to be able to fill that space with the things that they need that have meaning and care and intention baked into them. I think that's just a fascinating sort of evolution that we're in the middle of for the way we interface with our objects. I think it's really important, and it's also important for us to feel grounded, secure, and able to launch ourselves out into the world with the most momentum we possibly can if we're coming from a home space that feels like it's truly restorative for us.
I think that's completely true. And if we learned nothing else during the pandemic, I think that that's the lesson we learned. I think the most interesting outcome of this is going to be, what does work look like? Because even the most traditional office sort of bound businesses are having to reevaluate that. So our homes not only function as the place we lay our head at night, which is, in some ways what it really used to be before. Now they have to be, our home, our office, in some cases our schoolroom. All of these other sort of aspects of our lives are driven from our homes now. So I think everything is more thoughtful. And I totally agree with you. People want to invest in their homes now in a way that throwaway doesn't feel as safe or correct.
I'm really interested in this entrepreneurial side of you, but I'm also fascinated by the fact that you're an author and frequent contributor to magazines. Clearly you have something to say, but I'm also wondering why you are compelled to write. I mean, your books include Undecorate, the no rules approach to interior design, The Finer Things, which is timeless furniture, textiles, and details. And recently you wrote the book Frictionless, which is directly related to the inside and your system of creating a business that is frictionless in order for people to acquire things that are custom to them in a way that is also sort of comparable to the Amazon Primization of the world. On a personal level, how does being an author complement your endeavors, and why are you compelled to write?
I think that for me, just the act of writing is also a creative process, right? So it's just stretching a different muscle than the sketching or the, some of these other, the sort of tactile designing. I'm really intellectually curious. And so sometimes that curiosity vends with, the greater curiosity. So I learned a ton at Wayfair. And when I was thinking about what the future of commerce looked like, I realized that it has to be frictionless. Like, just think about all of our experiences. If you get into a situation in any kind of internet scenario where you get down a rabbit hole and there's nobody to talk to and this, that, and the other thing, like, you're out. You bounce and that's it. And I learned that really fundamentally at Wayfair. And one of the things that they're phenomenal at is customer service. So if you look at the happiness scale of their customers versus a lot of their competitors, I mean, it's night and day. And I think that this just got amplified during the pandemic, was that people who held their customers' hands, whether it was in person or virtually, those are the companies that have succeeded. And the companies that make things easy and frictionless for their consumers are the ones that we're loyal to. I mean, Amazon Prime is Amazon Prime because who says no to that? Even if it's slightly more expensive, you know that the process is going to be so frictionless that it's worth it to you anyway. We are also, between Bezos and Steve Jobs and swiping and Prime and all these things, we're also being retrained as humans, right? To behave in a certain way. So if you're starting a company and you make it difficult to interface, to transact, to get product, there's nobody on the other end of the phone to talk to you, to help you, it's not going to succeed. That's the knowledge I wanted to impart to any early stage entrepreneur. Think about how it's frictionless. Otherwise, you're going to have a very hard time competing, regardless of how much money you raise, right? I mean, it doesn't matter. Customers have to be satisfied. It's dead simple. That's what I learned, and that's why I wanted to share that book. I'm writing another book right now that's sort of a follow-up to The Finer Things, which is kind of a loose encyclopedia of furniture. So we're going to start to kind of break down each design category thoughtfully and write some design history.
Oh, wonderful. I'm looking forward to that. When's that out?
That is out in spring of 2024.
I'll keep an eye out for that. Back to the writing a little bit. You said you're intellectually curious. Does the writing actually help you kind of organize your thoughts? It's kind of obvious to me how it might be a supportive marketing endeavor, but it doesn't feel like it's just coming from like a savvy marketer.
I don't think you write really big textbook books if you're a savvy marketer.
No, right.
I wish it was a savvy marketing. It's like a journey for me. I mean, how do I ended up writing a textbook or an encyclopedia of furniture? I have no idea. But I would say that I went on a creative journey, and I started talking to my editor, and she was like, "You have to write that book." That's how I get backed into it. It's more just a sort of if this makes any sense, like a conversation I'm having with the design community. It's like, do you think this is cool? Yeah. Should we do this? Yeah. Is this important? Yes.
Yes, that does make sense. This is a conversation I'm having with the design community right now.
Exactly.
Just
so you know exactly
different
what it's
avenue.
like.
Yes.
Exactly. It's the same thing.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's a reverence for ideas.
Well, speaking of ideas, I really want to talk about your creative process because, you've already mentioned at the top that once you have a process, you can apply it to all of your endeavors. You are a designer, an author, a serial entrepreneur, an investor, which we haven't talked about yet, and a design historian. And so we've kind of heard how all of your thinking works to glue those together under the umbrella of Christiane Lemieux. But I'm wondering if you can kind of give us a overview of your process, like from the inception of an idea to like nurturing it into a thing.
If I look from 30,000 feet, a lot of this is informed by travel, right? It's informed by a lot of the inputs I've had in my lifetime. And then I do a lot of this through the lens of design. So I really believe the creative process is a continuum, right? If we're all talking to each other, there's very few completely original ideas. They come from some of the textiles that I just designed starting in ancient Egypt. So we've been speaking the same visual and creative language for as long as we've, been walking and talking to each other. I think it's a continuum. My creative process comes from, I'm inspired by this, and then I dive into, here's the history of this. So if I'm going to make a curved sofa, right, if I'm going to design it, where is it coming from? Some of it may be Royer, some of it may be Noguchi, some of it may be something I saw last week, but it's coming from something. And I really, really am very, very serious about talking about where the inspiration comes from, what the continuum of the design history is, the why now, and building on that, right? So like, I love Royer's Ours Polaire sofa, but it is very large, has very big arms, is very, very specific. But the shape of it is visual poetry. So how do you take some of these, building blocks and then make them perfect for current spaces, sizes, how we live and function. So I really think about it from that kind of 360 point of view. And then when you look at it, how does it make you feel? How does it make you feel when you sit in it? I really approach design it's like my mental blender. So it's, the historic continuum, how does it make you feel? Where was I inspired? And what story does it tell for you in your space? And how does it add to your life? Like, I think these things are really important.
It is. They're all very important. And I can kind of interpret this also through your entrepreneurial problem solving in terms of, how does it add to your life? What's the experience like? How does it make you feel? Even through the customer operation. Mm-hmm. For you personally, what's the criteria or the why now of starting a new entrepreneurial endeavor for you, knowing that it's going to, consume so much of your life and energy? Mm-hmm. It's got to have meaning for you in order to do that. How do you drill down to find that meaning?
Obviously, that's evolved over time. But now, it has to give me joy. Two, I think it has to be doing something accretive, right? Like it has to be building on something meaningful. I think now I'm building on my Dwell legacy, on the whole lifestyle brand, but bringing in all of the things that I've learned along the way. I mean, one of the things that I'm very cognizant of is that I don't want to create product that you throw away, right? Which is why I think the design continuum is important. I'd like to be able to create things that people love and live with and hopefully, pass on, as opposed to just trend and pushing things out and product for product's sake. I think that that's where consumerism is headed. I think that we're becoming philosophically much more aligned with our European friends who buy less, buy beautifully, invest. And I think that that's the right way to go. So I really try and bring that philosophy to the things that I start now. I really don't believe that you can find white space in the market, build one product, market on, Facebook, Instagram, Google Shopping, SEO, and build something of value. It's really driven by the customer. They have to be along for the journey with you, and you have to be doing something that's helpful to them.
I think now there's also a real need to resonate with the values of the company. Mm-hmm. So you started DwellStudio all on your own, very young.
Very young.
Now you've got several successful brands under your belt. I'm wondering how you would characterize your leadership and relationship building style.
It's interesting. That has also evolved along the way too. Now, I think that a great collaborative environment is the best way to maximize output. So, I always say this to everybody on my team, 10 heads is better than one. You're going to see something that I don't see. I'm going to see something that you don't see. Let's have a conversation. That's really become my leadership style. It wasn't necessarily always that way, but especially in creative fields, everybody's always got something thoughtful to add. So we do a lot of back and forth on my team. Our litmus test is, would I put this in my own home? We're not creating product just for the sort of creation of product's sake. We're really thoughtfully putting stuff out into the universe.
I like the idea of creating a truly collaborative environment. I feel like that is the real richness of life, right? When you're in a soup with other perspectives and ideas and you all get to be sort of nourished by what everybody else is bringing to the pot, it's just the best. Mm-hmm. So a big mission of mine here at this podcast is to humanize designers. And in doing that, I like to sort of celebrate the full spectrum of your humanity. So that means I usually ask some personal questions too.
Sure.
If you just want to get right in there, I love to know what you would consider your highest priority in life, in your whole life, not necessarily just your work life.
Wow. Right now is raising my children.
How old are your children?
My children are 14 and 16, and our teenagers in New York City, which is challenging in ways which I could never have known, nor is the sort of introduction of social media into parenting something something that's easy to navigate.
Yeah.
So when I'm not working and designing, I spend a lot of my time trying to feel my way through that and do the best job I possibly can. That's sort of my biggest priority.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, it's not easy. I laugh a lot because I thought, wow, it would be such a great gift to my kids to raise them in New York. They'll be at the Met every weekend, going to Broadway, all these things. And then We get hit with a pandemic, and then you layer Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok on top of that with a lot of time on your hands, and it becomes a pretty daunting challenge. But then beyond that, as I grow Lemieux as sort of a brand, I think about what kind of company I want to build, what kind of example mentor I want to be, as I think about the next generation of people that work in our industry, and trying to do the right thing. But also, when down at the product level, we just want to create things that hopefully don't end in a landfill or a trend-only breakout in a digital publication. Just trying to create something of longevity, substance that's helpful to people and good
has
to
a
the
soul.
planet. Yeah, it has a soul.
Yeah.
Right?
Is there something on the personal development side of things? Is there something that continues to challenge you, or where would you say your leading edge of growth is in terms of you on the ladder to self-actualization?
We're in such a huge flux right now. I mean, the pandemic changed the way we experience almost everything. And it's, fundamentally changed the sort of working schedule, the need to be in a fixed place. Almost everything is up for grabs. I'm in New York because my children are in school here, but after my children are done school here, the landscape becomes wide open because my team is already virtual because I built it. I launched the brand into the market in August of 2020. All of this has been in the middle of and/or, post first wave of pandemic. Mm-hmm. So, my team is dispersed. It's all over the world. It will probably never have a sort of structured office in the way that I would have, in 2019. So what does that mean for me? What does that mean for the people that work with me? What does that mean for our industry at large? These are the questions that fascinate me right now because it's so interesting to read the tea leaves in this complete, great upheaval of a long-standing tradition of how we work and live our lives. And so I spend a lot of time thinking about that. It's problem solving. It goes right back to what I really love to do. And so I'm trying to figure this out.
Still trying to figure it out. You've been doing that?
I know. That's all I've ever done. That's my sort of mission in life. I'm trying to figure it out. And there's a lot to figure out now.
Yeah. And there's also this extra important, urgent imperative that we figure it out in a way that is
thoughtful, sustainable. Yep.
Sustainable, thoughtful, and also much more caretaking of our own humanity.
Oh, I totally agree. And inclusive. Look, the great thing about design is that it's all of us. It's a language we're all in together. And it's one we all speak. And I think that the inclusivity of that, hopefully, much more thoughtful going forward, is the relationship we're in with each other. The future is wide open. And figuring that out is very interesting to me.
So the future is wide open. What is in the pipeline for you in the near future? And also, what do you see for yourself on the very distant horizon?
Well, in the near future, I am trying to build this new brand in this new world, in this new way. A sort of multi-category brand with a dispersed team in a world where retail is in total flux. So do you have storefronts? Do you have catalogs? Do you sell online? Do you do all of it? Do you, wholesale? All of it is up for grabs. And I'm honestly feeling my way through that because I think that the omni of everything is actually going to be what works. So being part of all of these channels of distribution from a business perspective, I think are important. So, I'm feeling my way through that, trying to understand what it means to be a brand builder in 2022 and beyond, because it's completely different, right? Nobody would have ever told you that social media would have been the biggest driver of brand awareness and sales. Even 5 years ago, people would have told you that was not possible. And now that we know It very much is. And, this morning I'm reading Meta might shut down in Europe. Like, what does that mean? It's changing minute by minute in ways that it never did before. Seeing around those corners is, one, very difficult, but two, really interesting. So I think I spent a lot of time thinking about what the future will bring. In the very distant future, I don't know, because everything's changing so quickly. It used to be you could have these concrete plans, but now technology is throwing us so many curveballs that the ideas that we grew up with, even the storylines that we were told over and over again, just are dissipating, right? I mean, who knows?
In a general sense, though, do you see yourself as like enjoying a large population of grandchildren? Do you see yourself taking a slower pace and sailing the world? Or I guess I'm trying to get a sense of like, you're always problem solving and looking around the corner. Is there ever like a moment where tranquility or just peace?
Yes, I'd really like to get my pilot's license.
Yes, okay.
And fly a small plane across the globe. I really would. And
I'd like to, that would be so amazing.
A photograph along the way.
Like a human drone photographer. Like
a human drone. I'd like to be a human drone for a while. And yes, I'd like to have a gazillion grandchildren if possible. Because the other thing that I think we all learned on this pandemic journey is when you sit in your home with your family, how awesome they are. And like, here you are with your team. And so now I want a much bigger team. I wish I could go back and have 7 more children. It's a little bit late for me for that now, but I think it would be, the importance of family. And I think that having a great home that sets the scaffold for that cannot be undervalued. I had dinner last night with my kids and I lit candles and we did a whole thing, and it's just a regular school night. But I was like, wow. I mean, here we are, we're sitting and we're having a conversation. And you know what? 2 years ago, when I was on the amped up hamster wheel and I was coming home from a meeting and doing this and getting on a plane and doing that, and then all of a sudden I slowed down, it allowed me to appreciate, one, how important not only my family and my, extended family as my friends, but also how important it is to have a place that they can come home to and congregate. My son said to me last night, he's like, you can never sell this apartment, Mom. You can never sell it because it's my childhood home. And I was like, you're right. And, feel that. And I'm glad you feel that way. And I'm glad it sustained you through the pandemic. And I'm glad that you're very permissive of your designer mom who changes the furniture schemes all the time. And I know you don't really like it, but I'm grateful that, you're along for the journey with me.
Oh, that's beautiful. And it makes perfect sense. You can't really think about what would make people happy in their own homes unless you've built that home for yourself. So
exactly. And it's not, at the end of the day, it's not about stuff. It's just about the feeling, right?
It's about the feeling and how the stuff can help create that feeling.
Well, exactly. Because if you're happy and the things that you surround yourself with make you happy, the feeling will be exactly what you want it to be. It'll feel like home.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you so much, Christiane. This has been really wonderful talking to you, and I really appreciate you sharing your story.
Thanks, Amy.
Hey, thanks for listening. To see images of Christiane and her work and read the show notes, click the link in the details of this episode on your podcast app, or go to cleverpodcast.com, where you can also sign up for our newsletter. Subscribe to Clever on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you would, please do us a favor and rate and review. It helps other people who would enjoy these stories find them. We also love chatting with you on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can find us at Clever Podcast. You can find me at Amy Devers. Clever is hosted and produced by me, Amy Devers, with editing by Rich Straffolino, production assistance from Ilana Nevins and Anushka Stefan, and music by L1011.